After dying 3 years ago, Loki is back. We got the first episode of his show, so let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies, TV, and Marvel way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your spoiler-packed thoughts on the first episode. What are your theories? All of that fun stuff. One more thing before we get started. This video is brought to you by Ritual. So later this year, I turn 40, and just a few years back, I started to pay a lot more attention to what I put in my body and making sure there's no gaps in my diet. That's where Ritual comes in. Ritual is the obsessively researched and transparently made multivitamin that's delivered to your door through a subscription. It's only $1 a day to get 10 high-quality nutrients. They're vegan-friendly, sugar-free, non-GMO, gluten-free, and allergen-free. As an example of how much detail goes into the products, they put a mint tablet in each bottle, so when you open it up, the bottle and the pill smell fresh and minty. Ritual has vitamin support for everyone. I'm using Essential for men, but they also have one for women, 50 plus, prenatal, postnatal, and vitamins for kids, which they'll actually take. If you're ready to take that small step and help support a healthy foundation for your body by filling in those gaps in your diet with Essential for Men, Ritual is offering 10% off your first 3 months if you go to ritual.com/Sean Chandler. Link is down below in the description, and use promo code Sean Chandler at checkout. With that said, let's get started with my general but spoiler-filled thoughts on Loki episode 1, and then later on I'll talk through some individual things that happened and thoughts, theories, analysis, all of that fun stuff. So speaking in general, I think the starting point you have to always come with me is that I was skeptical about this project because they so definitively killed off Loki, and then a year later in Endgame wrote a scene to bring him back to give him his own TV show. Inherently, as soon as death doesn't mean we lose the character, death in your universe is cheapened. As soon as death means, but we have time travel and we can go back in time and have variants, it cheapens somewhat the idea of the actual consequences of death in your continuity. I fully understand that this is a different Loki. I get that. But the idea that we're going back, no, we're going to take Loki phase 1 and send him off on an adventure in time, that means that we can always bring back dead characters playing this game. That's how it hurts and cheapens death within the MCU as a whole. So I say that's important to say that as a preface, because if you watched my spoiler-free review yesterday, you know I really enjoyed the show. And I said, I think they did as good as a job as you could possibly do trying to bring Loki back, or bringing Loki back. And the reason for that is built entirely into the direction they're going with this, is this concept of what was done in Endgame caused big ripples. What was done in Endgame is a violation of the way the people that rule time in the MCU perceive of how time should be treated. And so you have this concept in it that's interesting, that it's established very clearly in this episode that the Avengers were supposed to change time, but all the things that went along with that weren't supposed to happen. One of those things that happened was that because of their efforts, Loki escaped. Loki phase 1 escaped and created this variant that leads to the nature of this show. And there's just something interesting in using Loki and what happened in Endgame in his mischievousness of what would he do in that moment, to then teach us about the multiverse in the MCU on a very deep level and take us to a place that's interesting. And I think that's where it's able to do something that, man, do I think it's the best direction to bring Loki back? I don't know that you could fully convince me overall that that's what they should have done. But did they do a really enjoyable job with it? Absolutely did. Did they have an idea that I'm always going to be skeptical of? Yes. Did they execute it with excellence? Yes, they did. And those two things can exist at the same time, that I have hesitations about the concept, while at the same time being I had a lot of fun with it. I enjoyed the characters and everything. And they're exploring interesting stuff with it. So you have this character that we know, this Loki, because he's phase 1 Loki. There's just a split. And so then you have phase 1 Loki seeing whatever everything else happened. And that's fascinating to me that they were able to do that. But I don't want to get too much into that because I'm sure I'm going to talk about that extensively all throughout these reviews. And you guys will challenge me in the comment section about it all throughout all of this. But what's just fascinating about this show that I wasn't really expecting going into it is because of the nature of the TVA and their entire role, it creates immediately this discussion of philosophy and belief systems and diving into determinism and fate and is there free will in a way that we haven't really done in the MCU before and wouldn't fit terribly well into most movies because of the pace at which they go. But when you have a TV show, you can pause and have two characters with two different worldviews sit there and contemplate things. And that's one of the things I really wasn't expecting going into this, just how much it was really going to explore ideas, ramifications. Likewise, the way that this series is able to take just little individual scenes, essentially, from Endgame, where they talk about these different time streams whenever there's a change made. And all of a sudden, that's the basis for this whole second, like all of this world building on top of the MCU that we already have. Like, how do you keep the MCU interesting and fresh after 23 movies, multiple TV shows, going into phase 4 after over 10 years? And Loki is building that foundation for how you do it and laying the groundwork for a multiverse that's not just cheap gimmicks and like suddenly a portal opens and ta-da, we're talking to people that are the same person but different. It's not just Evan Peters showing and knocking on a door like multiverse. No, it's like, let's do the hard work to get there and create the rules, help you understand how this happened. It's happened before, and whatever's about to happen in phase 4, it's happening once again. That's just pretty cool that it's doing all of that in here. And, I was able to talk about how much I enjoyed the main characters and stuff like that without needing to go into spoilers as to it. But there's just the dialogue between them was a lot of fun. So from there, I'll just kind of do a bit of a walkthrough of the episode. Try not to talk about every detail because I don't have something interesting to say about everything. But I did have a lot of thoughts on most of what they did with this episode. Right off the bat, it kicks off in Endgame. Just those scenes that we saw before. We just follow Loki and see basically exactly what happens to him. If he picks up Tesseract, steps through a portal, and it shoots him out into Mongolia in the middle of nowhere. And remember, this is Loki, 20 minutes after Avengers, actually even before Avengers ended, the first Avengers, because that one ends with him taking off with Thor. And so this is literally Loki, who yesterday was with the Chitauri trying to battle New York and a couple days ago was in Europe telling everyone to bow to him. That's just days ago. That's his past weekend, what he did. Shows up in Mongolia and immediately is doing speeches to people to get them to try and bow down to him.
And I am still burdened with glorious purpose.
Because in this guy's mind, as it's playing out just for him, this is where she's still in the first Avengers movie. This is just the next act to his story of like what's taken place. Except for us, that was 9 years ago. And in the span of for us, 9 years ago, it's like a bunch of time passed. For him, it hasn't. So he's there, starts chewing people out, and then TVA agents just immediately show up and charge him with time violations. And you get the fun scene where he gets punched and then they freeze his time. So everything's happening normal for everyone else, but he's in slow-mo reacting to it. It was just a nice little scene to see like their wacky technology that they have and what they can do with time. So he gets arrested immediately. Doesn't even do anything with all the stuff that happened. He just picked a thing up off the ground. Boom. Immediately he's off on this adventure. And kind of goes into his initiation where there's the robot with the face drawn on it. So it's robot technology, and then it looks like a hand-drawn face on a screen, which the whole TVA world is filled with interesting designs that have this it's even tough to, like, some of it's a 70s aesthetic with the printers, with the paper you gotta tear off still, and the animation, the cartoon when Miss Minute shows the history and it's a 70s cartoon. And then you have like this robot that, like, hand-drawn face, like, what's even the rationale behind all that? But all of it's interesting. You just want to look at him like, why is this designed the way that it's designed? Robot takes away his clothes, and we start having this series of these scenes that we kind of had seen before, or some we saw in the trailer, with the guy that wants him to sign every word that he's ever said.
Sign this too.
And it's just a guy in a room doing his job. And then he goes up to a desk and has to hand over the Tesseract. And to him, he's worked so hard to get this piece of power. And then he just tosses it to this guy at the desk, like, be careful with that. And for us, these things are huge. Like, we watched the Infinity War and all the tragedy, everyone tried to get it. And now it's just tossed across to the other side of the table like it's no big deal. There's this whole scene where he's supposed to walk through this detector, and if he's a robot, it's going to melt him. And the guy operating it is just annoyed that he's taking so long. And then he gets to this room. There's only two guys, and there's just rows and rows for if there was a long line, and they still have to take a ticket, even though there's the two guys. And I just love the way that all of this is set up to just mirror the DMV. And I'm assuming that's called something different. That's in the United States. If you want to go get your driver's license renewed, you go to the DMV, and it's infamous for having these long lines, these employees that don't care, that are just like tediously going through person after person, just doing bureaucratic work. It's just like the post office where, once again, long lines. It's like the TSA at the airports. So the airport security, when you show up, and it's just these rules that seem arbitrary and about what you can and can't do, and everything about now we're in the TVA, and it's the same exact bureaucratic nonsense with employees that don't seem to care about any of it. And I think it's all trying to kind of like establish, based on like our normal assumption going into this is that, okay, we know Loki's kind of a bad guy, and these are the authority people trying to set things right. By default, we kind of assume they're doing something right. And at the same time, clearly they're just going through the motions. That's even one of the themes of all of this, is that they're just doing their job without stopping to think about any of it. You have Loki, who's mischievous, narcissistic, and selfish, but he has thoughts that they're not all wrong. He's like, wait, you guys determine what's happening? You guys don't know why you're doing this. It's just bureaucratic process, step through, do this exact thing, and just very early establishing all these themes about freedom, who has control, should they have control. It's not like we're like TVA, basically, we could have the same conversation. It's not like TVA is inherently good or bad, or Loki's good or bad, which is some stuff that's also explored in the show, but just immediately establishing all of this stuff where you're fascinating dynamics of unclear who's good and who's bad, which seems to be a recurring theme with all of these Disney Plus shows, where Wanda was the protagonist of the show and essentially the main antagonist, and all sorts of anti-authority, anti-establishment ideas in Falcon and the Winter Soldier and our assumptions about things. Then we get to this one, and immediately there's this bureaucratic organization determining what everyone does, taking away all free will, and Loki's kind of the voice of reason, while certainly being very far from a good guy. This leads to the moment where Loki sees the Miss Minute's history of the multiverse.
I'm Miss Minutes, and it's my job to catch you up before you stand trial for your crimes.
And this is just a fun little way of how do you communicate this deep mythology of multiverse in a way that's not people standing around in a circle with one person delivering exposition. How do you make it quirky and interesting? And it copied the style of all these summary overview cartoons from the 70s and early 80s. And I remember that, like, having been in elementary school in the 80s, early 90s, we watched those types of videos, and I don't know how long they stuck around. Perhaps some of them are still being shown at your schools. We watched a bunch of those exact type of cartoons. It's just a really nice way to establish this concept of there was a multiverse, and it was fighting with itself. These time dudes came in, decided we will bring order to this chaos so that everything's not destroyed, and then they decide what the sacred timeline will be. They decide it, these three beings, they decide it, and then they get this force, the TVA, to make all of that happen. And I'm not an expert on the TVA in the comics. They do have a history going back over 30 years and have tied into some different things. So I couldn't say how much this ties into how it really works, but they just gave us the MCU's version of it right there. And immediately you can start to see where some wacky stuff could happen in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and where they could be headed with all of this. In light of Endgame, in light of Loki being here, and what we kind of know is coming, what we've heard rumored for Spider-Man No Way Home, you can just start to see how the pieces could fit together in light of there was this battle in the past, and these guys forced it together, and you could tell, oh, so if these guys are removed, if these guys are disrupted, and we start having more variations again, does the war of the multiverse break out again? Is that phase 4? Is that where No Way Home is going to expand upon that, and then Doctor Strange tries to bring it back together? That sounds cool. That's very cool if that's where this is headed, and I start getting excited. I've had my skepticism about Spider-Man No Way Home. I've said things about how I prefer traditional story. Doesn't change. The same with my issues with Loki, the series. My skepticism isn't going to mean that I'm not going to have a lot of fun if they put out some wild, wacky, insane multiverse story where Loki, through his actions or whatever happens in the show, causes chaos or whatever it is. I'll have that big grin on my face watching No Way Home and watching Multiverse of Madness whenever that does or potentially happen, whatever does happen. So there's so much in this cartoon. 1 minute cartoon that's quirky that your brain just starts going, oh, could this be? Start playing the WandaVision game where we started guessing everything. This cartoon is where that starts with this show of, oh, and suddenly a million fan theories were born in one cute little cartoon about Nexus events and the role of the TVA. Then cut to the introduction of Owen Wilson as Mobius and starting to understand a little bit better what the TVA does. And they're back in France in the 16th century. And there's a bunch of dead bodies on the floor of these TVA agents. And so then we see him investigating. We kind of learn some variant has gone rogue and is just killing TVA agents, setting traps where they show up thinking it's a mild nexus and then they get killed. Mobius goes and interviews someone, this little kid, and through it he gets a pack of gum and he's like, well, that's weird, and points over at the wall of who's there, and you see this kind of devilly looking person. So I assumed it was Mephisto because I was part of all those watching all sorts of theory videos about WandaVision about Mephisto. So now Mephisto's my answer to everything. But I've also seen the end of this episode, and I'm assuming you have too. And pointing towards the Loki horns is what it actually meant. So maybe Loki is Mephisto. There's my fan theory. I need to make a video about that for next week. So anyway, that introduces Mobius and sets some pieces in place. I can't chime in too much on this stuff because I have seen the second episode and I do know where some of this is headed. So then we see Loki on trial for time crimes. And this is where when I talk about the bureaucracy of the TVA, you immediately see it. So he's charged with time crimes.
Crime against the sacred timeline. Absolutely not. You have the wrong person.
And Loki is guilty of a bazillion things. He certainly has evil intention, but in this particular case, all he did was pick up the Tesseract that was in front of him and go through a portal. That's all he actually did. And so they're like, you're charged to this. And he's like, I don't plead, I'm a god.
Madam, a god doesn't plead.
Like, well, are you guilty or not? He's like, well, of course I'm not guilty. The Avengers are guilty. The Avengers were clearly the ones traveling through time. Did you guys not see 2 Tony Starks? I could smell 2 Tony Starks, which is a fun little... Oh, that's what's nice about this show. Like, it managed to put these little zingers in there. They're not full-blown set up punchline jokes. It's not entirely quips. It's just funny little things that these characters would say that just put a smile on your face. Not supposed to make you laugh out loud. Just be like, that was kind of fun. So Loki says, like, I just picked up the Tesseract. What are you talking about? They're the ones that were screwing with time. Bureaucracy comes in and she's like, hey, they dictated to me and I'm dictating to you. The Avengers were supposed to do that and you weren't supposed to escape. Which, granted, in Avengers terms, he was not supposed to escape, but he didn't set out to break time. He's just a guy standing there that picked up a Tesseract to escape. Victim of escaping Avengers, they can charge him, but he didn't choose to create a time variation. They chose to create time variations. But that's not what matters to them. So you see that bureaucracy of like people that don't care about logic, reason, what's fair, what's right. These are people that they're looking to potentially erase Loki from existence for picking up a Tesseract and creating a variation. Problems in the morality of what they're doing. But I think that's the whole idea, is that we're supposed to immediately be like, okay, seems like Mobius, Owen Wilson, he seems like a decent guy. This whole thing as a whole, there's some problems with this thing and how they're running it. And so anyway, because Loki has no power here, he tries to use his powers, doesn't work, doesn't take, does some gestures. Once again, nice little smile on your face without needing to go too over the top. It doesn't have to overplay it, just puts a grin on your face, and we realize he has no power there. And enter Mobius, who says, hey, I believe you. I believe I know what you're capable of. Let me take this guy. And enter kind of the main relationship. Our 2 leads of the show finally start interacting back and forth with each other.
I'm Agent Mobius, by the way.
And immediately, these two are just a ton of... And immediately, these two are just a ton of fun to watch. A lot of that is the simple fact that Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson are just people that inherently have great chemistry with other people. They've got good timing in their back and forth. Loki in particular is just designed to be this character that's so manipulative and smart that it's just fun to watch that. And then Owen Wilson doing his thing, who is totally knows what Loki's doing, but he's playing all of it kind of chill and like just kind of going along with it with his Owen Wilson swagger and fun. And it just, the two go off each other so well because Loki has so much bravado, and Owen Wilson and Mobius chill, just going along with it. It's like, yeah, makes you sound smart. Well, I am smart. Yeah, I know.
Makes you sound super smart. I am smart. I know.
Just the right, perfect. Both of them with the attitude works perfectly. And as I mentioned before, the thing I wasn't expecting is it's a lot more philosophical. Immediately they start talking and Mobius is like, yeah, I was created by the timekeepers. My role and purpose is to keep the sacred timeline right there in order. And you have Loki who's like, what do you guys decide this for trillions? These guys decide it and you just do what they say. You just go right along with that. And you have this back and forth. And at the same time, Loki, who in that conversation is like, this is wrong that they would dictate what others do and take away their freedom. And then later in the conversation, he's like, freedom is overrated. People, it's the biggest, he does some quote, I don't remember exactly what the quote was about how freedom is bad. Basically, he wants to be their ruler and dictator and tell them what to do. And so at the same time that he's like, you guys shouldn't have control and power. That's bad for people. They should have their freedom. I should be the one taking their freedom away. Okay, Loki, you've got a lot going on too. He perceives of himself as a liberator that wants to enslave people. Loki, man, you are all over the place in your bonkers worldview, but I appreciate the fact that at least you know what you want and you're willing to pivot in light of new scenarios. They have this one little side quest in here as they're diving into the psychology of Loki, what makes him tick. They have this little side quest that I'm not quite even sure what to make of it, where basically they're talking about him, his mischievous nature, and then they show him on this airplane with the sign that says, I have a bomb. And this is a reference to this super famous case of this guy named Dan Cooper, or DB Cooper, as it was reported in the news, who did this insane, wild, weird plane heist thing. And it's never been solved. Like we don't know who the guy was, what happened. Like it's just like this incredible mystery. And they just incorporate it into the episode in this way that's just like, doesn't need to be there. They just say it off like, yeah, I lost a bet to Thor. And then we find out that who was this person in human history? Oh, I mean, yeah, it was Loki. Yeah, it's Loki. And they throw it in there. And I don't know if that's a plan for the rest of the show to kind of have these little rabbit trails. But it was a fun detail. I'm just not sure where they were going with it, because it just felt like they didn't do that a bunch of times. They didn't have it, like it's not a repeated beat that they're like, look at all the wacky stuff Loki's done throughout time. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that or what it means. So anyway, all that to say that, like, I liked the scene. I liked the touch. I liked the detail. I'm not sure that they needed to do it. It feels like the sort of thing that if you were more strained for time, if this was a movie, you would certainly cut that out, because it's like, that's a nice touch, but where are we going with this? Whereas almost everything else felt like it fit, had a reason for tying into things. That didn't feel like it fit, though it was a lot of fun. So then Mobius decides to show Loki Phase 1, Phases 2 and 3 of the MCU, which is a little bit funny the way this plays out, because he's Loki Phase 1. That's literally exactly what he is, plucked straight out of the end of a movie. And then we know Loki Phase 2 and 3 and all the arc that he had. And so you literally have Owen Wilson being like, here, man, let me put on my MCU Blu-rays and starts watching Thor, The Dark World, and Thor, Ragnarok. And he's like literally showing them these movies that we've already watched. It's just it's an interesting concept to have the character watch his own movies and react to them. Like he's literally, how would Loki react to these moments? Now we know. Now we know what that would be. It's just a fun, interesting concept for it. And I think somewhat where I have my reservations about the concept of this show, but their execution was really smart. And they did the stuff that you went, oh, I wouldn't have thought about that. That is a fun thing to do. Oh, yeah, that's true. He would be able to sit there and watch Blu-rays of the MCU and watch the movies. Those are fun things to do that let you see the character in this new light. And so, we see the deceptions that he did in Thor: The Dark World and how it had consequences that hurt him personally. And he has to accept the fact that what he did had really bad consequences. And so through this, eventually TVA agent says, hey, we've got to talk to you in the hallway, Owen Wilson. So they let their guard down for just a second. So he does what he does. He escapes and starts running through the hallways, goes back to the desk guy at the beginning that he handed the Tesseract to because he wants to get his Tesseract back. At least this moment where he just opens a drawer, and inside the drawer is a bunch of Infinity Stones. And him as a character and us as an audience, Infinity Stones to us, these are the thing. This is power. If you want power, if you want to rule, as Loki has said, I want to rule Asgard, Earth, all of space. How do you do that? Infinity Stones. That is the key to power. And they're sitting in a drawer. And they mean nothing here. And Loki has this realization, wait, if I want power, power isn't Infinity Stones anymore. There's something, what's on top of Infinity Stones? I thought they were the top thing. Something even higher up. Time. Which, okay, that's interesting. Because going back to our little cartoon we saw earlier, these time guys, because of what they did, stopped the multiverse. Loki realizes Infinity Stones aren't the key to power. Being the guys over the sacred timeline, that's the key to power. So he wants to take out the guys that stopped multiverse. Oh, is this where Phase 4 is going? All right. Once again, the pieces coming together. And how did this? You think all the ways to play it out? Once again, do I have reservations about the show? Yes. Did they find excellent ways to execute it? Yes, they did. I would never think, like, what if there's a drawer of Infinity Stones? Like this drawer right here. Literally, I got like my desk, like little tripod thing I haven't used forever. Roll of tape my kids left in my office. They actually have my fan mail too. My letters, I keep them right next close to me. But there's a bunch of things in here that are just like things I put them because I'm not sure where to go, but I want to know where to find them. So they're here. But that's what was done with Infinity Stones. The same way that I treated this roll of tape right here that I don't even know where it came from. That's the way we're treating Infinity Stones. That is such a wonderful visual metaphor for this world that would make Loki go, my old plan doesn't work anymore. I'm not in that timeline. I need to figure out how to take out the timekeepers. Get the power that they have. Done with a drawer, a junk drawer. That's so interesting. That's such a smart way to visualize it. So anyway, he ends up back in the room. He wants to keep watching Phase 3 of the MCU, puts on Thor Ragnarok and kind of watches his dad die and start crying a little bit and sees like him and Thor getting along, shaking hands, and Thor saying all these nice things to him. Then he watches the opening scene to Infinity War and sees his own death. What was meant to happen? What did these guys up here choose as his destiny? Because they decided that, hey, he makes up with Thor and then dies. Actually, another way to think about this, since the MCU up to this point in time has been determined by Kevin Feige, Loki Phase 1 really doesn't like Kevin Feige, who I'm assuming is the actual timekeeper here. So he has this moment where he looks at it and it's like you can see the emotion. He's feeling so many things of like, that's what was supposed to be. Supposed to go there and die. And I didn't even save the day. Didn't become king of the universe. I didn't get any of that. I just die. And he just has this moment where he like cry laughs. His glorious purpose. And realizes all of the stuff that he'd stand into crowds of people and like, you will bow to me, I am Loki, I am a god. All this stuff that he said in Avengers and all the stuff he said to the Mongolians, all the stuff he said on his trial, and his actual glorious purpose that the timekeepers had for him was Thanos kills him. That's like sinking into his mind. And obviously, even having seen the next episode, I don't know where all this is going exactly because it takes a long time to figure out exactly what Loki's thinking, scheming, where he's trying to take things. But his plan in his brain is not what it was before. And so you see him meet back up with Mobius. He like accepts like, wait, I can't go back to my timeline. Whatever I thought was going to happen in my timeline, I don't want to do that anyway. I don't want that to be my destiny. So I guess we'll go along and we'll play this game. So he starts actually opening up a little bit to Mobius. He's like, I don't like to hurt people. It's not like I like to hurt people. It's that it's part of the game of like, I want to show my control. And what's one way that you could force control when maybe you don't really have as much power and control as you think? You take it away from others. You kill people. You hurt people. And in that moment, you have control. So interesting little observation about not just Loki, but people in general. Why do bullies bully? Well, it's a way to bring order to chaos in a moment and have a little bit of control, have a little bit of a moment where you have power. Why do people do this stuff? He kind of says it right there in that moment. And you see Loki just starting to like come around to what's happening here. We don't know all where this is headed, what he's going to do, what he's thinking. But he's coming around just a little bit. And then Mobius basically puts it on the table. Hey, I want you to help me find this variant. I want to team up with you. You have a set of skills that would be very helpful for this guy right here. It's like, okay, all right. Well, why do you want me? Why would you want me to team up with you? He goes, well, because we're hunting down a variant of you. That's where this show is going. That's fun and interesting. And You understand? Like, okay, why? How is all this, like, trying to piece together, why did they decide to bring Loki back? Why of all the people is he the one that we're going with? And how would it be interesting? 2 Lokis. Okie dokie. Let's see where this heads to. And you just get that tease of all the possibilities of a world where you have a Loki that's not good, but he's not out for anarchy and chaos, time anarchy. He's not out for that just yet. And then you have this other Loki who's going out killing TVA agents. Unclear objective, but definitely out there starting to tear down the system that's holding the sacred timeline together. So you start just kind of piecing all of this together. We know Loki Phase 1, probably not a big fan of the Timekeepers who don't give him the glorious destiny that he believes that he deserves and should have. They don't give it to him. He doesn't like the fact that they're in control, not him, and he wants that power. He thought it was Infinity Stones, but there's something above that. It's what they got. And then we learn there's this other Loki out there who's taking people out. TVA agents in particular, with some scheme. Start piecing it together of these Lokis. Whatever this looks like, one of them, both of them, some way trouble is coming involving the timeline, and the people keeping this whole thing together, they got a Loki problem brewing. And it kind of closes out with this little scene in France, and it's like fields or something like that, and they smell oil, and they think, oh, they're smelling oil, what's going on? And then someone in a cloak lights them on fire, kills them. There's a trap. Episode ends. So to give some final thoughts on the episode, what I think I appreciate about this episode versus the premieres of Falcon and the Winter Soldier and WandaVision is you get to the end of this episode and you have a very good idea what the show is about. Thematically, character arcs, the threat, without it being super obvious exactly what's going to happen. You got to the end of the first episode of WandaVision. You got to the end of the second episode of WandaVision. You got to the end of the third episode of WandaVision. You still didn't know what was going on. And there's something about that that's fun, but it is so much just throwing you into the deep end and being like, hope you can swim. Whereas this one, it's not like it was just holding your hand. It was enormous in exposition, but it was like, here, let's explain this time stuff and establish multiple characters with different worldviews, different value sets, and this scenario that's interesting about the sacred timeline, or I guess the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we know it is the sacred timeline. Kevin Feige's Marvel Cinematic Universe is the sacred timeline. Kevin Feige might have a little bit of ego in that one of calling his cinematic universe the sacred timeline. That's fun. But we know that thing is probably in jeopardy. What could be the consequence of this show? And they've said in the interviews like, oh, Kevin Feige said, this is the show that's going to have the biggest ramifications for the future. Why? Because his sacred timeline is in jeopardy. So you have a clear threat. You don't know exactly who the final villain's going to be, but you know who are some people that might be going after the sacred timeline. You know who's trying to save the sacred time. So you have clear idea of the threat, the stakes. You have we also have learned that if sacred timeline is broken, multiverse chaos war breaks out. So we know all kinds of stuff at the end of the episode, while at the same time, a bunch of questions are raised. Like, who is this Loki variant? What are they trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? When did they come into effect? Like, how exactly does this play out? What does it mean exactly? And that's what makes this so much fun. Or like, let's go back to Falcon and the Winter Soldier. You get to the end of the first episode and you're like, okay, there's flag smashers out there. Bucky's bummed out, he's going through the 12-step program. Sam is having trouble getting a loan. What's this? Oh, and there's a new Captain America. What's this about? You get to the end of the second episode and you go, yeah, flag smashers are bad, but they're not that bad. Okay, they're super soldiers, but like, what's their scheme? You don't even find out their scheme until like 4 or 5 episodes into it. In this one, you have a real grip on what's happening. The stakes, motivations, tons of very cool world building, And you can see how it ties into other things. So that's for me why this one was the easy one to latch onto. Even though it's different, it's not action-based, it's very dialogue-based, it's very philosophical, very psychological, very different. It's not like anything we've got in the MCU before, but you see the connective tissue, the bridge, how it ties into things. So you know how to latch onto it and and so for me, I got hooked very immediately watching it, and it's like, all right, let's put that second episode on right now. That I wish I could talk with you about what happens in that one. I had to be very careful about what I said in this video because I know what happens in the next episode and didn't want to say too many things about it. So anyway, I really enjoyed the episode. As a skeptic, as someone that has issues with the basic premise of using time to bring people back, I will always have those problems. But the execution of this episode was really good. The way that they've done all of this, I really enjoyed. Remember to join me down below in the comment section. Let me know, what did you think about the episode? And if you're interested in filling in those gaps in your diet, you can get 10% off your first 3 months from Ritual at the link down below in the description and use promo code Sean Chandler. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much.